Okay. Good. All right. Now, that's just you and sex. Now, you may encounter or already have in your experience people whose sexual addictions are focused with the internet. So sex and the internet, basically they engage your addictive attention just like food and drugs do. Okay? Because it's about what your brain, body, and so your identification with your brain and body, what that does. You are your body, you are your brain, you are your experiences, and you identify with those things. So that becomes engaging your addictive behavior. So you are your thoughts and your body, and you think pretty much that's it. So for example, with sex and internet addictions. There's a therapist, a lesbian sex therapist, who basically talks about the reason that she introduced the concept, at least here in Oregon, she's not from Oregon, a lesbian sex therapist from San Francisco who talked about, okay, I'm an alcoholic and I'm in recovery and I'm a lesbian and I'm a therapist. And she says for a lot of people in recovery, sex is a recovery issue because we got loaded and had sex. And we did a lot of things that we ain't proud of. And so now that we're clean and sober, all that guilt and shame is coming up. We don't know how to have sex because we don't have relationship school. Right? We don't. And this isn't really talked about in treatment a whole lot because treatment is populated with addicts and alcoholics who are just about as shamed about what they did as we are. So, part of what happens with sex and internet addictions. So, for example, this is from her website. She's an outrageous lesbian psycho comedian, sex therapist, and best-selling author. It's how the copy reads on an ad for her upcoming show. And although psycho comedian may be a typo, she's a psychotherapist. Expresses the energy you're bound to feel at her shows, which she was definitely funny at the Oregon Institute of Addiction Studies in the late 80s. In her book, The Lesbian Erotic Dance, Butch Femme, Androgyny, and Other Rhythms, she begins to create an erotic language for lesbians in which to describe themselves and express their desires. In between seeing clients, touring, visiting a sick friend in the hospital, and keeping appointments with the acupuncturist to cure herself of breast cancer, Ms. Lewin found time to talk to me. So she wrote a book. So besides lesbian sex, she wrote about period for women to explain to their daughters the changes that are happening, because she found there wasn't one. And how do you talk to your kids about sex? You wait for the school to have the plumbing lecture in middle school? Not working so well for us, is it? Okay, so Period is a guide to menstruation with a parent's guide. And everything a young girl needs to know to prepare for her own body's changes, plus a removable parent's guide. So she's in recovery, and so she talks about, okay, we're in recovery, and so sex is a recovery issue. So she talks about the S word in the big book. To sum up, this is on, it starts on page 69, for real, goes on to page 70. To sum up about sex, we earnestly pray for the right ideal for guidance in each questionable situation, for sanity and for the strength to do the right thing. If sex is very troublesome, we throw ourselves the harder into helping others. We think of their needs and work for them. This takes us out of ourselves. It quiets the imperious urge when to yield would mean heartache. Now, that's a nice sentiment for 1939. But in the age of AIDS, that ain't working. That's kind of like, okay, every time you feel a sexual urge, don't drink, throw yourself into serving others. Like, yeah, people are doing that when in 12-step programs or within groups, they're talking about 13th-stepping people. Ha ha ha. That is when you're having sex with a newcomer. Right? I mean, if you have that as the inside joke, what's really going on? If they tell you within the program, don't start a new relationship if you're not in a relationship, like wait for a year. Really? People are going to be abstinent for a year? We're talking humans now, right? Humans with addictive behavior, really? They're not going to have sex for a year? Right. How's that working out? So, I mean, and I'm quoting Joanne on that. She said, look, we ain't doing that. So AIDS basically came, and then sex became a recovery issue, especially if you are a sexual abuse victim, a sexual minority, self-medicating due to trauma or guilt. That was sexually focused. And, you know, when we talk about, you know, relationship school, early on in this lecture, not today, but last week, when we talked about portrayals of movies. Who decides what goes into a movie? And when we talk about portrayal of sex, how often is it sober? Usually it starts at a bar, right? Portrayals of sex while sober. There aren't many of them, if any. So that gets portrayed as normal, and guess what you do? That's not working if you're in recovery. So when we talk about natural rewards, and so one of the things that Joanne talks about, sex done right gets you high. The reason it gets you high, and it's a recovery issue because you already feel guilty, not only about sex, but about getting high. Sex done right gets you high. That is, it engages the brain reward system the way an addictive drug does, but it's healthy if we talk about all the things that we were talking about. Two consenting adults, conscious, sober, talked about all the stuff, you know, all the baggage that they bring. Oh, you know, I didn't necessarily bring this equation in. I hope it's in this slide later. I haven't told you about a relationship equation, right? No, okay. This is algebra. Don't freak out. But it goes like this. A relationship isn't just 1 + 1 = 2. It's not. People have baggage, things that they hide from themselves and others. So that's going to be represented by X. 1X + 1X. Then there's Y. Why are you seeking this person out, and why are you attracted to this kind of person? And you may or may not be conscious of it. I like to say, your picker software. Who or what is attractive to you? This goes with that whole self-knowledge thing, that self-gnosis. Why am I attracted to bad guys? Yeah, what is it about bad guys that you like? What's attractive to them? Do you like to be rescued, or did your knight in shining armor become a monster? Because everybody has a look good, right? And when you first get together with somebody, you're getting together with their look good and your look good, right? So you got your X and your Y, and they got their X and their Y. And so honesty in relationship is about making those things known, but usually what happens is you have 2XY, and your X's and their Y's get together and they multiply in secret. And then all of a sudden you have all these relationship problems, which, okay, you stick together or you don't, and then hook up with somebody else until you become conscious about what's going on with your baggage and their baggage. So, sex done right gets you high. And with that, with people in recovery having guilt and around feeling high in addition to whatever else they may have done to get sex or to be sexual, there's a lot of complications. So what Joanne talks about, and this comes from movie portrayals about what is quote-unquote normal for sex, because of the technology around movie making. Movie making is intense for you, the watcher. So I want you, if you want to do a social recon on this, you don't have to write it up if you want. I mean, you can. But I'm pointing out this. Just look at a sex scene in a movie, or a love scene in a movie, if you will. How long is it? Get a stopwatch. Whenever you decide the beginning is, start the timer. See when it ends. And when it ends is usually the fade out. Joanne suggests 3 minutes. Now, would you like to have a 3-minute sexual experience? No. No, that ain't working. Right? Even if you have, because I'm basically talking about this because this is what has come up in the client base. Okay? Some people learn how to have sex because their parents didn't talk about it through internet porn. That's why sex and internet are lied in this lecture. Because of the absence of relationship school, some people learn how to have sex with watching porn. Then you could do the same thing with watching porn. How long does a sex act last on a porn movie? And is it the same continuous sex act, or is it looped? Okay, you also find that it's like what? 10 minutes? I don't know, I'm just saying, time it. There's technical reasons for doing it. That's why they don't necessarily have a couple making love, because remember, there's a technical crew. There's 20 people around there. There are very few people that can have sex under those conditions. Is that real natural sex? Is it healthy to tape somebody while they're having sex without unawares? No. Bad boundaries. But, all right, what would you consider, fulfilling sex session? Not 5, 10, or 15 minutes. And what Joanne suggests is if you've been sexually traumatized, sex is going to bring stuff up for you. You're going to have flashbacks of your sexual trauma because you're having sex, even if it's with somebody you love or care about. You're going to flash back, and that's going to come up, and you're going to freeze up, and if your partner is, at all conscious, they'll notice that. And you'll notice that. So you need to develop the capacity to talk about it. And so Joanne basically talks about, well, most people are conditioned by movies and porn to start, and then once the big O happens, it's over, or whatever. Right? And that takes, 3 to 10 minutes, whatever it is, within the context of the movie. Well, real life doesn't happen like that, especially if there's sexual trauma. So, she suggests a technique she calls stop and start. Stop when you don't feel safe. Wait till you feel safe, then start again. To whatever goal you have, whatever that is. Because sometimes sex can also go beyond orgasm. Some people just trade the cuddling. Look, I'd rather just be held, but I'll trade you an orgasm for just being held. Well, we could just say, look, just hold me. We don't even have to do the big O. or whatever, but being able to talk about it because of trauma, right? So within the proper boundaries, basically this kind of stop and start conversation can happen within the boundary of safety. So those proper boundaries, right? Safer sex, those implications could include pregnancy if it's a heterosexual couple, or knowing the STD, HIV, and HCV status of the partner with any couple. And then the whole boundary violations piece, whether there's a power differential, whether it's professional ethics, age, you're cheating on somebody with somebody else, or they are with you, or whatever, and other roles. So safer sex is all of these things. So before addictions, we start with health. And basically that whole why the field is concerned is the whole 12-step approach to sex, page 69 in the book, which is basically consisting of don't hurt anybody. The 13th step, which I talked about, and the whole idea of recruiting somebody at a meeting because of you want to hook up with them sexually. The mythology about no sexual relationships for a first year of recovery. So, celibacy, that's kind of Catholic, and it's not working so well for the Catholic Church. Okay, yeah, age of consent for organ for women is not 16. Sex with a child under age 16 is still statutory rape. Sex with a girl, woman 16 to 18. If you are over 18, is contributing to the sexual delinquency of a minor. So, healthy sexual relationship. Who's teaching what that is? In schools, we hear about safe touch, the plumbing lecture. Churches, no sex before marriage, then sex for procreation. Then what? So, media, basically, Cosmo magazine, Sex in the City, Dr. Ruth, Dr. Maltz, Wendy Maltz is a local sex therapist that talks about the sexual healing journey for those who've been sexually abused or traumatized. Offerings on cable, the internet, your peers. Many people basically find out what a healthy sexual relationship is through trial and error. That is usually orgasm mechanics. How do I make you come? How do you make me come? Cuddling, etc. So, and Joanne Lulin basically talking about what her stuff is, stop and start. So let's see, we did this already. Hey, he hasn't come in with 5 minutes yet.
He's waiting for the 2 minute.
Okay. Lose that.
Ooh.
Ah. Now, I'm going off on this thing for internet addiction because he is going off on the 2 minute thing. Good call.
I was drinking coffee.
Thank you for resisting. The Band of Six Enemies. This is from the Kama Sutra. A person who conquers the band of six enemies within him, or within themselves, desire, anger, greed, pride, intoxication, and joy, conquers the earth too. The band of six enemies. Now, the reason I brought this up with the internet is we haven't come up with a Kama Sutra for the internet. Kama Sutra is an ancient text. Kama means love. Sutra is basically a discourse or a sermon about it. Basically, it says there's 3 aims of life: power, pleasure, and religion. And so when the Kama Sutra was written, basically we're talking about there's 3 aims of life and 3 aims of sex too: power, pleasure, and religion. And this is one of the concepts where sexually focused ecstasy or spiritual practice comes, and they talk about that within the Kama Sutra. So when it's talking about the internet, part of that is looking at how those aims are achieved. The internet was designed for sharing weapons research. And essentially, it's like two-way television, where you can represent yourself as anything or anyone you want and reach out to other people and influence them. Okay, so this puts the power of a television station into civilian hands. All right, so part of responsibility in terms of like the internet is you can be influenced in an addictive way and influence people in an addictive way with the net. They're going to start the credit roll, so we're going to leave it here and continue on Thursday.
Say that last thing one more time. Not the continue part.